Methodology of Humanities, Module 3, Narration and Representation, Part 6, The Postmodern Narratives. The postmodern era has led new ways to introduce new modes of narrative technologies. In the pre-modern periods, we had an oral way of communicating ideas. Ours was an oral tradition. When printing press was invented during the modern times, writing, reading, etc. was promoted. And in the 20th century, when new technologies emerged like radio, television, and the internet, new modes of narratives became possible. The late 20th century or the first decade of 21st century witnessed a great revolution in the field of technology, and even books appeared in the form of digital books. The hard copy of a book gave way to soft copies. You can download books from the net and read, or without pen or pencil we can write. Or even the oral tradition could be reinvented. The virtues of the oral tradition, the pre-modern period, the literature of that past era could be recovered and stored in our personal computer. So narratives have changed. The fixity attributed to texts in printed form began to get a kind of destabilization. In the days of oral communication, we used to tell stories, but stories would differ from person to person. If I tell you a story, that story will be different from your story. When you tell the story to somebody else, the text would change, the narrative would change. But when printing was invented, all of us would get the same copy of the same story, and there is a fixity about narration. Now everything is on the constant flux. In the postmodern era, everything changes. There is no fixity attributed to a text. So grand narratives, great novels or great epics or great films and such long narratives encompassing the whole world, that disappeared. That ceased to be grand any longer, great any longer. And history was no longer sustainable by traditional historical discourse. We can never say it is there in history books, because history also is part of a great and grand narrative. And history has attained the form of a fiction or fact and fiction. Everything came under one category. Everything is representation. History is representation. A novel is a representation. It's a construction. It's a narration. It's a story. History is his story. And her story would be different from history. Ultimately, everything became a narrative. So audio, video, textual, verbal, everything, all types of narratives coexist in these postmodern times. French cultural theorist Jean Baudrillard, he declared that technologies reproduced science, and in particular narrative science, SIGNS science, which developed rapidly in the 20th century. The narrative science made diverse narratives more familiar as well as frequent and brought them within easy reach. Even during the days of print, we used to get copies of pictures. When Ravi Verma painted an image of a woman, there was only one copy of it. Walter Benjamin, in his article, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, speaks about it. Ravi Verma's paintings were available as calendars, printed calendars, and those were hung on the walls of our houses. Then now we have everything within the fingertips. Everything is digitized. Every split of a second we see a plethora of images. So it is made available very easily. It reaches everywhere instantaneously. And this is a narrative sign, a picture, for example. And we are conditioned by these pictures. Our identity is getting constructed through these kinds of signs or images. Radio was a good case in point. It proved a technology which resulted from abilities to transmit messages in the form of electromagnetic waves through the air. This system of communication had both official and domestic use. Governments have control over these kinds of modes of communication. It had military as well as domestic use for official and also for other purposes, non-official purposes. The dependence upon radio, upon sound, meant that narrative could maintain an important presence in the domestic environment. Means, for a printed book we have to go to a library or to a public space, or for a newspaper. Of course they can be brought to our home, it can be bought and brought, but more easily the sound reached without the agency of anybody else. We need not go out physically and buy a book. If radio is at home, anybody can have an access. The sound is there already without any kind of issue. Even in lockdown, even if the book is not available, even if the newspaper is not available, the sound can reach us. Radio can reach even in the nook and corner of a village. Yet the dominance of radio was brought down by the visual technology of television. When TV came, the sound is supported by visuals, and people were attracted towards television. The possibility of transmitting moving images and sound from 1950 onwards, with experiments in transmission through cable continued in 1990s for somewhat 40 years. TV was available through cables. We have had antennas, and now we have everything in the digital form. This led to the introduction of sound and images for television, later produced digitally. These developments in enhancing the medium of narratology reveal the importance of its visual nature. Narratives in the form of visuals. There were images, now we have moving images. Sound was there, and we used a radio for that purpose. And in the postmodern era, we have everything, all aspects, satisfying all our senses simultaneously could be had. So narratives became more prominent. Even without our liking or disliking of a particular narrative, it would come to us. We need not go to it. As John Corner and Sylvia Harvey, the American theorists, in their Reader Television Times in 1996, as they put it, television, literally seeing at a distance, seemed even more miraculously to bridge the gap between world and home, opening out a corner of the home onto a range of changing scenes, recorded and live. In book and in newspapers, we had only previously recorded, edited, printed or written ideas. Now we have everything live in a way which initially had all the allure, charm of magic. Like radio, it too was a sociable medium, often addressing the viewer as a member of a known community, sometimes perhaps as a friend. We feel at home with the TV. We think that we are taken to the far-off lands, and television images, newsreaders, or our political leaders, they appear closer and become members of our family. However, it was the sights that television offered, variously mundane, earthly, or extraordinary, very intimate, close, and grand and great at the same time, very much informative and thrilling and exciting, which gave it its distinctive identity and force as a cultural technology. TV has a technology, and Connaur and Harvey put it as TV as a part of a cultural technology. It is not passionless, emotionless. It is part of our culture. It has begun to intervene in our everyday cultural practice. Like radio, writing and oral modes were characterized by immediacy and domesticity in a manner similar to how television has lent itself to informality. Television was characterized by its ample presentation of both fiction and non-fiction. Television has ceased to be a mere source of entertainment. It has become a source of information as well. News, for example. Its ability to use both fiction and non-fiction to communicate to its viewers, and following the proliferation of VCR, the spreading of such gadgets as VCR, video cassette recorder, and also satellite communication, cable television, digital media and the like, a wide range of mixed programming like narratives and non-narratives, for instance, films, documentaries, classic dramas, sports events, live telecast of programs, all these things reached within the fingertips of a viewer. At our disposal, everything is there. The fate of narrative has paved way for a new advent through the birth of computer technology. Radio, television, newspaper, everything is there. At the same time, computer has created a kind of change in the world that we can't imagine the scope of narrative with the help of a computer. We can make interactive narratives in TV and radio, an instant interaction or modification, change in the text of a narrative could not be made. But when it comes to the computer, again, the viewer, the reader, the writer, all people can participate in a narrative which was not that easily possible in the modern times. In the ancient times, when somebody told a story, the listener could intervene. In such a way, in the postmodern scenario, we can see such a change where even interactive text could be made. The digital computer has become available for both business and interactive necessities since the 1980s. It has a number of implications for narratives arising from fact and fiction. The various features confronting the necessity of narrative technology could be accessed through digital computers, the computers that we use nowadays. The information and narrative are stored as well as retrieved easily. The term that we associate with our brain, called memory, is used in the case of a computer. Computer has a memory. We can store and retrieve certain narratives in multiple form in a computer. The physical equipment can perform a massive amount of tasks and has created a new conceptualization of space, a virtual space, which is otherwise noted as cyberspace, taken from a novel by William Gibson, an American-Canadian writer, in his science fiction titled Necromancer, published in 1984. See, everything can be put in a small chip. We need not carry volumes of books. You can have everything in a hard disk. The final decade of the 20th century, of the last century, marked a link between individuals and organizations, generating a network for transforming data, and it is known as Internet. We can interact each other through Internet. The World Wide Web, WWW, gives access to a huge number of documents connected to each other by means of a form of writing, which is called hypertext. Some kind of an interconnectedness could be achieved. Hypertexts allow words to be highlighted in hypertext markup language, HTML, within web documents, indicating the information related to that topic in the text. It can be accessed separately by an instant transfer to another place in cyberspace. For example, the hypertext in the topic of plants may contain underlined words such as family, botanical name, species, existing environment, and the like, indicating that the information could be accessed through the underlined titles. Just click on the underlined words. Another page will be opened where you can have the details of it, and you can come back to the main text. And anything, everything in narration could be effected in the postmodern era, in the computer digital era. Text began to crisscross. A kind of traffic of text could be seen. Unlike in the print media, everything is solid there. It is final there. We cannot erase. We cannot substitute one sentence with other. But here in the internet, we can have everything in a, not in a solid form, but in a multiple form, liquid, gas, air. It can be compared to all these kinds of manifestations of our energy. As James Murray, the Scottish lexicographer, says, the computer is an incunabula, a kind of book that was there before the modern period. As we have slate to write in our primary classes, we can erase and rewrite. Book also was like that. Or when we write with a pencil, we can rub off the words by using an eraser, just like that. Computer is just like a slate or a book in which we are writing with a pencil. We can make alterations, changes. A technology whose major uses have not yet developed, rather like printing and movie camera as in the early days. Computers are yet to reach their scope of experimentation in the field of narratology, which opens a wider space of narrative possibilities. Any part can be cut and pasted at any place of our like or dislike. Anything can be used or misused. So such a kind of freedom that was not available in a printed narration, a printed narrative, is available with the coming of the computers. Owners of cam recorders, webcams, digital cameras, and the existing availability of software have created a window into the formation of their own visual narratives, and the distribution of it is made possible through internet. Anything and everything can be captured with a webcam. Automatically things could be shot and passed through the internet. It is also possible to reconfigure existing written narratives. In the days of Xerox or photostat copies, we couldn't imagine that some 20 or 30 years back. So even existing written records can be photocopied or scanned and converted into a soft copy. And with the use of scanner and editing software, which combines the existing narrative with a novel narrative input, a new narrative input, digitized format of text could be had. Now, we can send text or receive text through the net. We need not physically carry one text from one place to another. Text can be modified, and the possibilities of the internet. So narratives ultimately change. Narrative is not simply a matter of reference to the world. In the past days, we can say A is for apple, or there was a one-to-one correspondence between two things. But we can never say a narrative is a matter of reference to the world. It has nothing to do with the world, any particular specific object. It's a representation, it's a construction of the world whose real purpose was the storing of knowledge or identity. Actually, a narrative is constructed to construct an identity, to know about a person, to know about a society. We construct stories, but it has become almost impossible now because of the coming of these kinds of narratives. Narrative represents features of the world like time, space, and sequence. But nowadays, the sequence is upset. The space has become a virtual space. Time, we can never say past, present, and future. Past, present, future has become a single word. Past is something that we construct now from the present. Future also is a construct of the present. And we live in the eternal presence. Eternal present we are living in that particular moment. It also facilitates and explores the self in it. In a narrative, we have the capacity, we have the facility to explore the self in it. Our self also has undergone a sea change into something rich and strange. In the 21st century, narrative performs all these with the specificities of the technological availability. What machine you have within your reach? If you have a digital camera, you can construct a reality. If you have a mobile phone, you can construct a narrative. So the revolution in the world of technology has changed our narratives drastically. And ultimately, it would affect our identity as well. There is no fixity, there is no integration, there is no firmness as we had expected or experienced in the past. We are having multiple manifestations through multiple narratives available through these brand new forms of technologically advanced type of machines like mobile phone or the internet.